I was born and reared here October the 12th, 1907. My mother's brother was a doctor, and he delivered all of us children here. He told my mother I was the plumpest little baby he had ever delivered. So that, of course, made me feel good when I was old enough to realize. We lived together here with my grandmother. We were a happy family. Nobody ever quarreled. We always had men working here. My mother was always the first one up in the morning. She would open the boys' bedroom door very carefully. We never knew how many people were going to be here for breakfast. And there was always room in my brother's bedroom for extra people.
My grandma, Mathias, was a widow. And we lived with her, or she lived with us. We all got along together. She's a fine woman and did a lot for us youngsters, and was very good to us. And I can see her every night along about 9 o'clock, put in some oil in a lamp and take off upstairs and spent the night there until the next morning.
We originally thought we were German descent, but we have learned that we are from the Huguenot family. There were 3 brothers originally, were severely persecuted. They left there and came to Germany and found it was no better there. The time came that they decided that was not the life for them, and they migrated to Philadelphia, coming down Virginia, the Shenandoah Valley, living there a while. The land was bought in 1791, but no building was started until 1797. And 2 rooms, the south end of the building, is presumed the first 2 rooms, because there was a large fireplace in that. And sometime during the 1700s, a large cook stove was bought from someplace, and that had a little medallion on the front telling what date it was. And that was what heated the 4 rooms in the house, 2 up and 2 down.
When I was 9 years old, I was tending the horses. We had about 8 horses at that time to feed, and that was quite a job. And sometimes I would have to help with the milking. Everybody depended in those days on the threshing machine to come along and thresh their wheat. And it was a very hard job at times. And there's one thing I always looked forward to, and that was hauling the water for the engine, which was necessary. And I enjoyed driving that cart out to the river, and had a barrel on it, hold about 40 gallons of water. And the farmers united together and would know about what day the thresh machine would come by. And it was a great time. It took anywhere from 10, 12, 15 people to thresh. Some of them hauled the grain in from the field, Others put it in the thresher. Some had to measure it as it came out of the machine. Some carried it in on their back to the greenhouse where it was stored and used during the wintertime. I thought I was one of the big fellows there.
Life then was, I'm sure, a struggle. It was a struggle for survival when the part of the open season and the planting season, when they had to plant and tend to and cultivate and harvest, because if they didn't, they could not make it through the severe winters that were sure to come. And be ye not prepared was one of the best ways to assure a winter that would bring you to your knees. And a lot of those early settlers, as they probed into these areas, into the Lost River Valley, as they tried to clear the land, as they tried to plant crops and rear families, and as they tried to nurture their animal support lifestyles, found it almost a lost cause.
My grandfather died early and left my grandmother to rear the children. And so she lived there with my father and the younger sister. And my parents were married in 1900. And they all lived there together happily. And I don't know what year my father's younger sister married, but I don't believe it was too long after my parents were married in 1900. The walls were originally whitewashed, and my parents were married in 1900. And over the years, my mother said, I just can't hardly stand this whitewash. It had to be done every spring. And the ceiling was so high, they had to put boards on top of the kitchen table for someone to stand there to reach the ceiling. The house was thoroughly cleaned twice a year. We had certain people that came, just paid to do that. And oftentimes, if we didn't have money, they would take vegetables or fruit or whatever was available for their pay. My father was a very, very generous man. I've never heard him say no to anyone. In our kitchen was a large kitchen table. Each of us had our own place to eat. Behind the table was a large kitchen bench which we children sat on. My grandmother was a very devout religious lady. She read her Bible constantly. And my older daughter, May, was her favorite. She had beautiful long white hair. And my sister would stand on a box behind her and comb her hair. That was a daily chore for my sister to do. So she loved her so much, she said, I want to teach her everything that I can while she's young and growing up. She also used the same box to stand on to wash dishes. And I often felt sorry for my sister because she was always in the kitchen or she was always doing chores for my grandmother, which I thought was just beautifully. We went to a two-room school. Each of us had a chore to do when we came home in the evening. Soon as we arrived home, our clothes were changed, and each of us went to whatever needed to be done. We had all types of animals on the farm, always hard hands. The chickens had to be fed, the hogs had to be fed, the cows had to be fed, the horses had to be fed. And oftentimes we would play in the hay mow, and we'd say, hide and seek, can we get in there? And we'd cover ourselves up, and there were wonderful days.
It occurs to me that it's so much, I don't remember who the person was that said, isn't it a shame that we waste all of youth of our lives on the young? And it's maybe a little bit of a shame too that it seems like we are so close to the end of our lives when we seem to have a little better understanding of what life is all about. And it is only as we are somewhat older that we seem to develop an appreciation for the things of life that really, in the best and in the final analysis, that are really worthwhile. And it seems so often that these were the things that were right under our nose all the time. But we apparently were chasing the gods, maybe to the four corners of the world, to try to find the things that were the happiest. I remember, as I look back now, that's one of my big mistakes, that I was too far along in life, or a lot further along than I would like to have been, when I began to appreciate the antique things, the heritage things, the cultural things, the ancestral things of life. The Mathias Homestead is the oldest permanently and thoroughly established residence in Mathias. And it is and has been for some time now being restored, and is in the process of that, of trying to bring it back again in a good way, and in the Mathias family from which the little village has taken its name, of bringing it back and restoring it for our generation and for future generations.
There's no electricity all in the building. And everything that we've done had to be done with hand tools. And a lot of them are very old tools, like mortise in there is done with an old plane. And the sides and all in here were done with draw knives and spoke shaves, planes and axes or hatchets, hand saws. Everything was done with the hand saw. Cut the mortises and all the tabs and everything with hand saw. All of it was done with hand tools, as it might have been done several hundred years ago. They got a contractor come in and replaced the logs, and there was no roof at all on this upper side. There was no roof at all on it, and replaced a lot of the logs and recaulked them all, and brought it up into a stable condition to whereby it wasn't deteriorating anymore. Put a good roof on it and all. And then I started on doing the interior and put on this porch and doing the banisters and so forth. According to the logs and so forth, this upper part here was the original, the first part that was built. It was built, we had several different theories on to the age of it, and one year was established as 1792, and another one was 1797. So my assumption would be that the south portion of it was built in 1792 and the north portion in 1797. Now the logs over these breezeways are continuous logs from the lower part and butted against the upper part, which is very indicative that the lower part was built last. So that's there are 6 logs, 3 on each side, that come from that part over against this other part. And they call them a breezeway or an entryway, as the old people called them. Of course, the porches were all gone, and I built this whole porch on this section here all by myself. The whole work's clear from the bottom. There's nothing there. And then I've done work on the interior and the steps and got them all fixed up in the attic and some weatherboarding on it. fixed up the windows. I got a few more of them to go and some more molding such as this, and I have to make it and put it on. I've tried to make it as original looking as possible, except for the paint. The paint they used on this is what they call the old buttermilk paint, and you can't get rid of it. On the outside of the windows, on the back side over here, the boards are almost rotted up, but the paint is still there. And it was made with buttermilk. Incidentally, I have one of the recipes to make it with.
In the winter, we popped popcorn, made taffy, had parties. Ice skating was one of the big things. The rivers were deep in those days, and we had some really good skaters. In fact, my brother still has his skates. I think he's had since he was 17 years old.
If these skates could talk, they would be quite a story. The winters were colder years ago than they have been the last 25 years. At that time, skating was the best pastime we had. In fact, the only one that would work in the wintertime.
We'd build big bonfires. It seemed like the winters were cold, but we were young, and it didn't make any difference how cold it was. My father bought all types of chestnuts in those days were just as plentiful, and people would bring them in there by the big sacks full, and walnut kernels. And he had a section in the store that he would put the walnuts and the walnut kernels and the chestnuts on the floor till they dried. And then he would put them in barrels, and they would ship them to Baltimore. He would take them to Broadway and put them on the train there. He also bought chickens and turkeys by the wagon loads. And I can remember one winter, a neighbor came with a 2-horse team with a wagon load of turkeys, and he drove across the ice, and it did not crack or it did not break. He had a couple that lived in what we call the Upper Cove, and they walked 5 or 10 miles when these chickens and turkeys were bought, and would come down, and the man would stick these turkeys somewhere around the head, tie them up on cranes that came down, and just pick them dry, and cut off their feet, and put them in barrels, and overnight they would be frozen, and they would be taken to Broadway and put on the train. But I can hardly conceive or tell you that I bet that there were enough feathers that would be at least 6 inches deep over and over the many, many years.
He could recall and tell story after story after story. And I remember it was on the Mathias Homestead grounds that he told me once, he said, "Joan," he said, "when I got out of high school, I had to go, I went to Bridgewater, Broadway, with a relative to finish my last years of high school. And I'd come back, and I told my dad, I said to him, I said, I'd like to go to college. And my dad said, well, there's no way that we have the money that you can go to college. But it was right out here. And, well, maybe you can't see this picture here in detail. It was right here in this field that my dad said, Virgil, you help with this corn crop, and if it does good, we maybe can get you started in college. Virgil can tell so many other tales too, of the dirt road that goes through there, and of driving a solid, tired, spoke-wheeled old truck. And it's the funniest thing to hear Virgil tell it, that a fella started to flag him down along the way. He had made this fella mad some way, and he started to flag him down. And Virgil said, and when I come back by him, I just cut at him. And he jumped out of the way.
We're a small town, but we had a good baseball team. And from time to time around the area, we proved it to our likeness. We had a game scheduled with Broadway, which is 25 miles away. And of course everyone was expecting a landslide. And it's one of the first times that we ever played that far away from home, 25 miles. And it was back in the days before cars. And the boys rode out to Broadway the evening before the game and spent the night there. When they rode into Broadway, they called them the bums, the hillbillies, and so forth. Anyway, the game took off the next day, and the first batter up hit a ball that was played by the first baseman, and his foot hit the bag at the same time the batter, and it put him out of the game. But as the game rode along, Mathias began to show some concern and interest and little power. To make a long story short, the final roundup was Mathias 27, Broadway 3. And long before the game was over, they started leaving the scene and left there. And after that, Mathias didn't have any problem making themselves known. But Broadway didn't want to play any more games, and didn't for several years.
It means a lot to me that for some time now that the decision has been made and have been working on keeping and maintaining the Mathias homestead, the old house area and the old barn area, and have been searching to try to bring it back again to the way that it was in its former years.
The farm was a good place for a youngster to grow up. He learned what it was to work and how much it tied in with our living.
These are good memories to look back on. They're a part of our heritage. And unless we are so inclined to do, we let the things that had such super value, we let them get away from us. And it reminds me of family. And we're not moving in the direction of the good, strong, supporting families that once were a backbone of our country. And if we're not careful, we lose these things. And once they're gone, they're probably gone forever. And we're not able to bring back, like maybe we celebrate Thanksgiving. And it's one of the times when one of the most important things is to bring together the family, as much of the family as we can, and to try to hold on to those good, strong traditions of the past that give us the goodwill and the direction to want to face the future.